All right. Well, hi, hello, and welcome to Ensuring Cyber Resilience and Recovery from On-Premises to Cloud Native. Today's exciting webinar is sponsored by Veeam and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Jess Steinbach. I'm with Actual Tech Media, and I'm so excited that I get to be your moderator for this conversation today because I am truly fascinated by all the elements and the pieces that go into this idea of resiliency. And there's a lot to that word, right? A lot to that idea. Resiliency is not just a checkbox. Wouldn't it be nice if it was? But there is a wide and ever-growing range of considerations, strategies, approaches, all kinds of things that we take into account when we're going for that, that wonderful title, that wonderful peace of mind that comes with that knowledge of resiliency. And today we are focusing on how to protect your all-important applications, increase app mobility, and preserve both security and functionality across your diverse and complex and layered IT infrastructure. With the help of two leading experts here with us today, we will outline what you need to know to meet all of those goals and avoid costly downtimes and rewrites. This is going to be such an interesting conversation. I cannot wait to get started. So we are going to zip through a few of the housekeeping points and get this show on the road. All right, let's start out with a little bit of a guided tour of your audience console. So as always, we will begin in the questions window because this is my favorite part of the webinar. This is the best part of the webinar. We want to hear from you as we go through our day today. So keep those insightful questions coming in. If you have ideas, things that you want to explore, if you have comments, feedback, whatever it is, get that into the questions window. We can start out right now. We'll give it a little test run. I see some highs and hellos. Hi, Ahmed. Hi, Ned. Hi, Richard. Hi, Jorge. Oh, we got Gilbert with us and Rakesh and Gonzalo and Akshansh. All right, we got a whole awesome crew with us. What a great start to the day, and more coming in. Seema, hey there. All right, keep those highs and hellos rolling in because this is a great way to start out our day today. We want to be interactive and we want to be hearing from you. Now, that questions window is also going to be the best place to let us know if you do have any technical issues. Knock on wood. Hopefully that doesn't come up. But if a little tech gremlin gets in there today, the first thing you're going to try is a browser refresh. I promise the browser refresh is going to clear out most of the usual problems. If that browser refresh doesn't work, you can shoot us a message in the questions window and our team will be there to help you out. Hey, Nikki. Hey, Paul. I love all the joiners coming in. It's so nice feeling like we've got this wonderful community here with us. And I love starting out any webinar. I know you guys are going to get a lot out of this webinar today, so I'm already pumped up for you. But I love starting out with a good chat with all of you. So thanks for the shout outs and the highs and hellos, my friends. All right, well, so we've got the questions tab settled. Now we're going to head on over to the handouts tab. The handouts tab is absolutely chock full of cool resources and takeaways. This is the most important part of the webinar, right? We stay, we learn, we absorb, we converse, and we have this wonderful time. And then you need to be able to recall some of the information afterwards. So grab those handouts, make sure you've got them, hold on to them, and save them for after we wrap. Don't go anywhere yet because we've still got a lot of cool conversation coming at you. All right, and if all that cool conversation wasn't enough to get you pumped, how about a $250 Amazon gift card? We have that waiting for you at the end of our webinar. So you do need to be here live and present at the webinar, and all winners do need to meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. If you do not have those memorized, no problem, I don't blame you. You can head back over to the handouts tab, click in, scroll down, and you will find the full terms and conditions waiting for you there. All right, well, that was it. I said I would keep the housekeeping short and sweet, and I meant it. We are ready to get rolling on our conversation today, and I am so excited to introduce you all to our two wonderful experts here with us from the Veeam team, my favorite crew of superheroes. I love that, the Veeam team. Just, you can hear the superhero entrance music swelling in the background, right? Here talking to us today, we will be chatting with Sam Nichols, Senior Director of Cloud, Kubernetes, and Anything as a Service at Veeam, as well as Michael Cade, Field CTO, Cloud Strategy, Veeam. Sam and Michael, I'm so excited to hear more about increasing our resiliency. I know that you have a ton of great content planned for us. I know Megan is waiting in the wings to join and dive into some questions with the audience as we wrap up here. So lots to do, lots ahead of us. Sam, I think you're going to kick things off for us today. So I'm going to hand things on over to you. Take it away, Sam.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another exciting Veeam webinar, ensuring cyber resilience and recovery from on-premises to cloud native. Definitely excited to go over this with you guys. I think a lot of you folks know and use Veeam, particularly for your on-premises workloads, but we live in a very hybrid and multi-cloud world today, and there's a lot of different ways to run things in the cloud. So this session is all about how you can ensure resilience and recovery for those cloud hosted, cloud based, cloud native applications. My name's Sam Nichols. I'm in the product marketing team looking after our cloud, Kubernetes, as well as some of our Veeam Data Cloud as a service offerings. Been with Veeam for about 8.5 years now and worked on pretty much every product that we have. So I definitely feel like I'm well versed to talk to you about the on-premises to cloud native world. And then I'm also followed by or joined even by my friend, compatriot, Mr. Michael Cade. Michael, a few welcome words from you.
Yeah, cheers, Sam. Yeah, so I'm Michael Cade. I'm a field CTO at Veeam. I've been here pretty much the same time as Sam, just over 9 years. And my focus really for the last 3 years has been all about our cloud strategy. So that includes our public cloud integrations, as well as what we do from a Kubernetes point of view. And we're going to get into a bit of that. But my background is very much around virtualization and storage. So I very much have walk that same line that many of you on the call will be walking or already into that process. So we're going to get into a bit more of the security, the resilience, the recovery, and everything around that.
Awesome. And then just as with all webinars, we do like to keep these as interactive as possible. So I believe it's on the right-hand side of your screen. There's both the chat and the Q&A function. If you're having any issues or anything like that, please use the track chat. Q&A function is great for questions. Michael and I do love questions. The harder, the better, because I can't answer those. That's going to be Michael's job. And I like to see him squirm, keep him on his toes. So throw as many difficult questions in there as you possibly can. And we'll really just adapt this webinar as well as a couple of demos that we have prepared for you to really help answer those questions, because we're putting this webinar on for you, not for us. So, I mentioned at the beginning that we live in a very hybrid or multi-cloud world, and this is from our data protection trends report that's going into its fifth year now. And with 5 years of data, it's great to see like what kind of trends we're seeing. And I don't think that there's any surprises here that we continue to see a declinature of physical servers on premises in the private data center, and similarly for virtual machines. But those hosted virtual machines within a hyperscale provider like an AWS, an Azure, a Google Cloud, or even like a regional or sovereign service provider is really continuing to grow. COVID was definitely an inflection point here, but I think this is ultimately just a result of strategies evolving. And one of the misconceptions out there is like everything is going cloud. It's not. The cloud is a great place to build and run applications, but it's certainly not a catch-all for everything. Those with data locality requirements, with certain performance requirements, or even cost requirements, sometimes the cloud isn't a right fit. So we're ultimately living in this very blended world where we have workloads running on premises and in one or more clouds, right? And I think that's multi-cloud piece is really critical to note as well, right? There's hundreds of different services available just from AWS, Azure, and Google combined. Each one of them, helping serve different needs more than others. So again, we're just living in not just a hybrid world, but a multi-cloud world as well. And we'll get on in a little bit, just kind of how different cloud can be. Like it's not just one way of running things. There's multiple ways of running things. But Michael, do you have anything to add on this kind of hybrid or multi-cloud world that we're living in?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to that the level of control that you have or you give up or you offload to a service provider, whether that be one of the hyperscalers in AWS, Azure, or Google, or an MSP. Whereas if you're running your own virtual environment on prem, or you've got physical servers in a data center, you're in complete control for most of that. You're going to be looking after the VMware or the virtualization environment, the physical servers if it's your data center, or you're going to be offloading some of that cost. Cloud just accelerates that offloading of the overheads when it comes to managing the infrastructure, the physical stuff underneath. Ultimately, a virtual machine on prem, is pretty much the same as it is in the public cloud. An EC2 instance is just a virtual machine. You just don't have access to the underpinning architecture. But as Sam said, it's not just cloud isn't just about virtual machines. There's a load more in there, and one of the most topical things that we're seeing is obviously there's a big thing happening around virtualization at the moment about choosing the right hypervisor or choosing the location of that. So we'll get into a little bit more about that as we go as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we kind of fallen folly to this in part of the title, right? Of this webinar, we said from on-premises to cloud native, and I think that's another way of like people think about things. It's like one or the other. We've got our traditional applications that are running on-prem, built on that monolithic, tightly coupled architecture, that three-tiered application approach with, your web server, application server, and database, heavily focused on that waterfall release with very imperative APIs. And then you've got that stark contrast on the other side, which is cloud native, right? So we start to decouple our applications in favor of microservices or serverless architecture. We've got a very agile release and declarative APIs. So again, very, very polar opposites of one another. But in reality, it's actually a spectrum, and there's a lot of stuff in between in terms of moving to the cloud that we also have to be cognizant of, right? So we've got our cloud enabled applications. So this is what Michael was talking about. An EC2 instance is just a virtual machine in the cloud. So these cloud enabled applications are running on the cloud, but again, in that kind of on the left of your screen, that more traditional approach. So this is monolithic cloud VMs lifted and shifted from on-prem. I'm going to take those 3 VMs that are powering that web app and database and just move and run it in the cloud. Then we've kind of got our cloud-based approach as well. So we start to decouple the application components. So that data service, like a database, instead of being or running on a virtual machine, we'll run it on platform as a service, or maybe even like software as a service with things like Microsoft 365. We wouldn't say Microsoft 365 is cloud native, it's cloud based, it's software as a service. But we start to reshape that application and take advantage of some of those platforms that are available in the cloud. And that ultimately offloads, the ongoing maintenance and management of, for example, databases or hypervisors, puts that on the cloud provider, and we've just got that database ready to use. We can focus on that development. So my key point here is this is a spectrum. There's lots of different options available to you, from, again, that more traditional way to cloud native, everything in between. You are not going to, or you are likely not going to be 100% traditional on-prem or 100% cloud native. Across your journey towards the cloud, as you develop new applications or update or upgrade applications, you're going to be falling somewhere along this spectrum, and it's not going to be the same for every application. You're just going to be left with this very heterogeneous environment. Michael, anything to add here?
Yeah. So I think there's two things that I'd like to add here. One is around cloud native. If you've never ever you've only heard about things like Kubernetes, containers, etc. You've only just heard about that, and it's a daunting like prospect that you're how am I going to move what we have off the shelf software here in a virtual machine into that cloud native when the software vendor doesn't create that container image. I think that's it. To Sam's point, is that might not happen. So that can be a virtual machine, but the secondary bit to that is about understanding what cloud native is, so that when you're sat around a planning table, thinking about what that application needs to look like, thinking about the scalability of that application, that flexibility of it as well, where can it run, as well as the resiliency of that, is I need to have the understanding of what cloud native is, what traditional is in terms of those virtual machines, those physical machines on prem, looking after it, the pets and cattle type analogy, and what am I going to have to look after and what do I not care about to spin up, spin down for that scalability and speed. But knowing that I just if you have an understanding of all of the different options that you have available to you on that spectrum that Sam touched on, is it's going to empower you to make a much better decision within the business to choose the right path for that particular workload. And the second bit to mention there is that like virtual machines aren't going away, but equally a virtual machine in the cloud shouldn't be the goal and the final destination. The goal should be, how can we re-architect, refactor that, if we can, into a more cloud native type service. So how can we offload some of that requirement around operating system patches, having to keep the lights on, having to keep things updated? How do we ensure that, let's offload that to the cloud? Because then things like last week, and I know we're going to touch on, because it wouldn't be a webinar the week after a global outage without touching on it, is that if you offload that to a third party, generally it's going to be Linux anyway in the cloud, then you're not, it's not your responsibility to keep that application up anymore. It's the data is the most important part, and I'm definitely jumping ahead here, but it's about not being afraid of what cloud native is. Understand what that is, and it's really about leveraging cloud computing environments to its potential in terms of that scalability, that flexibility, and providing resilience to those applications and the data services that you have within it. It's no real different to what we've had in the past. It's just a different way of thinking and framing what that application looks like. And you can have bits of both ends of this spectrum, per se.
I love that you mentioned that, Michael, right? Because I feel like, in this cloud world that we're living in, everyone's talking about cloud native. And you mentioned that, that's the goal of where you need to get, but there's so many different steps and pathways towards getting there. And I forget who released this piece of research, but they mentioned like the average refactoring or modernization of an application from traditional to cloud native takes 16 months and $1.5 million. So that's a fair degree of time and money that it takes to get to this end state, and you're likely going to have steps in between. And again, there's always going to be data, right? It doesn't that data can be hosted or located in a completely different way than what you're used to, but that data is still there, and we've got to ensure that resilience and recoverability of that data. And that's what we're going to get into now, which is, this is from our most recent data protection trends report, where we asked, again, unbiased, wasn't just Veeam users, over the past 2 years, what are the most common causes of outages that your organization experienced? So I don't think it comes as a shock to everyone that cybersecurity events top that list. And I feel like, in this, that's what we've been speaking about for years and years, right? Ransomware. It is absolutely rife, but we've forgotten about all the other reasons for that, or that cause outage and data loss, right? Infrastructure and networking outages, storage hardware outages, application outages, outages of public cloud resources, which we'll absolutely get onto in a little bit. Good old administrator configuration error. That's absolutely what we'll talk about in a little bit as well. But there's all of these other causes that can bring your organization to a halt, like we saw last week, that we really need to be able to account for. And again, like, the key message here is, if you are moving, or actually it's a case of when you are moving towards cloud hosted, cloud based, or cloud native workloads, always keep in mind that there is going to be data, stateful data, that lives somewhere. And if we do not protect that data and ensure its recoverability, that is a gaping hole to outage, that we leave open. Michael, anything to add here?
Yeah, I think obviously everyone's aware of cybersecurity events. We see them every day in the news, but I think it's also telling when you see the outages that are mentioned there, whether it be infrastructure, whether it be storage, whether it be application, and then things around hardware and public cloud resources. Their systems, at the end of the day, they have a they are renowned for configuration changes that, and things go wrong. That's not a new phenomenon from a cloud perspective. Um, it's a given. I think we emphasize a lot around cybersecurity because it's applicable to everyone, but there's a lot more. There's still the age old fire, flood, blood type outages that we see on there as well, with the natural disasters down the bottom, and then the intentional malicious activity. Another one that I generally talk about down the bottom there as well is that people make mistakes in a malicious act to get back at their boss, get back at their company, and you have to protect yourself from that as well. So yeah, I think cybersecurity is always the top headline because it's always topical, but the others are still there and they have been for the last 20, 30 plus years. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I actually don't have this piece of research in the slide, but when we look at that and people moving towards the cloud, we're dealing with double-digit percentage figures of folks that believe that when they move to the cloud, their responsibility of data protection, backup, recovery, ensuring the availability of that service ends, and that the cloud provider is going to take that on. And it's simply not true. And what I wanted to do was just highlight, some significant incidents over the last 12 months, maybe a little bit more, that have really brought either an individual organization or dozens, hundreds, even thousands of organizations that rely on these public cloud services to their knees, right? So we've got an AWS one in June of last year. There was an outage in their US East 1 data center, so that's the one based in North Virginia. There was an issue with a capacity management subsystem. Michael will probably be able to give more information on what happened there, but the result was there was widespread website outages for a number of organizations, right? Major news outlets, a number of airlines, transport authorities like New York Transit, lasting more than a couple of hours. And all the while, those websites are down. Those customers are obviously not able to go in and book a flight, manage their booking, whatever it might be. So this is one example of a cloud outage. More recently in Google Cloud in just May of this year, this was only isolated to a single customer, which was UniSuper. They're a superannuation fund based out of Australia, whereby there was an inadvertent misconfiguration during the provisioning of their accounts by Google, and that ultimately saw 600 plus thousand customers unable to access their funds for more than 1 week. Right? These are superannuation retirement funds. So that's causing, big brand reputation issues for UniSuper. Now, I do want to call out here that UniSuper didn't just rely on the redundancy that Google Cloud provides, right? Because if they did, a deletion of that account is just replicated no matter how or where it's replicated. They actually had standalone backups that were being egressed from Google Cloud and being stored on Microsoft Azure. And if they didn't do that, being able to get them back to the existing state pre-disaster, I mean, let's just call it what it is, they wouldn't have been able to get back there, or it would have taken even much, much longer than an entire week. So do want to call out UniSuper understood what their responsibility in the cloud was, made sure that there was a contingency plan again by getting backups to an alternate platform and ultimately being able to recover. And then, of course, the one that we all know about that happened, when was it, last Friday, Michael? There was a significant outage in Azure Central, their Iowa data center. What caused that, Michael?
yeah, I would actually love to know if there's anyone on the call that was impacted by this. So basically, any Windows machine, whether it was a desktop, laptop machine, a workstation system, or actually a Windows server that is running the CrowdStrike Falcon agent patch and was updated, then you got the blue screen of death, and then you had to go round and you had to patch it when CrowdStrike released that. But that's one thing that's to do with software supply chain, from what I've read over the weekend, and it was all about automatically pushing out their updates potentially without testing them correctly. But alongside that, it also affected Azure as a cloud and actually took down the US Central region as well, and gave, well, basically unavailability in that region for not only Azure services, so your Azure SQL, Azure virtual machines, as well as Microsoft 365. So again, to UniSuper's multi-cloud approach, they had scattered their data across multiple clouds, gave them that resilience. When it comes to your operating system and you have that exposure to that update, which To be honest, we don't see this every day. But it's worth mentioning because it is a failure, a disaster. A disaster doesn't have to be ransomware, as we just saw in the previous slide. But ultimately, how could backup help at that point? Well, we have a last known good configuration copy of that data before that patch went in. We would have had the ability to not only restore that back to how it was, but equally, if one of the clouds is down, we have that portability story about being able to send that data either back on prem to any of the hypervisors or equally to another cloud with a direct restore to that. So that's kind of a plug for, but equally around that resiliency story. What do you do when bad things happen? Like what we saw last week. Now, everything we saw, if I'm right in thinking, it was between 8.5 million to 9 million devices that were affected. Let's say that half of them, and again, if you were impacted, let us know. I'd be more than interested in understanding what that story looks like. But if we could use backup to recover that workload and get you back up and running faster than, say, CrowdStrike releasing the patch and the updated version, to then manually have to go round every single server that you have, and in some cases, looking over social media, there was some with 2,000 to 5,000 VMs that they needed to patch. That's a horrible weekend for anyone, when actually we could just use that backup that we have and just restore that. So very topical, I know, but the cloud isn't
Impervious. There's a
yeah,
big
there you go.
word.
That's a good word. It is, yeah, it happens. Like the cloud goes down like every other system. It is just a system. It's just not controlled by you. So that it's about having that awareness and having that responsibility then when it comes to your workloads and more importantly your data. And I know we're going to get into that as well as we keep moving through.
Michael,
On Sam, before you jump in, there is one question from the
sure.
audience. Adam would like to know if it's possible to restore an on-premises VM backup to the cloud, Amazon or Microsoft hosted VM in a disaster recovery scenario. Is this possible and how is it done? Kind of topical.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Adam, I'll take it, and then Sam, if you can add anything, I'll let you go. But yeah, basically, Adam. So yes, any of our image-based backups, they land in a format called the VBK, which is a portable data format. We can recover that into, well, really, it could be into any location. So that could be, we have the ability to directly restore that into an Amazon EC2 instance. We have the ability to restore that into an Azure VM, also a Google Cloud Compute. But equally, we have the ability to restore that into Hyper-V, into Nutanix AHV, back to another VMware environment. And that works seamlessly for all of those. So if we're thinking about an EC2 instance, we can restore that into Azure. We can restore that back into VMware, vSphere, etc., etc. So that portable data format, how we write that data, has been key for Veeam over the last 16 years, and it provides that massive differentiator. And the best way I've described this in the past is that if you think about a zip file that you created on Windows 98 all them years ago, and you've got that zip file today, and you plug it into a brand new Windows Server 2022 box or even a Linux box, you can open that zip file, hopefully, and you can extract the files out of that, and you'll still be able to read everything on that. Think of that as to how the VBK is. It's a compressed, self-describing format file that we can really manipulate what that looks like and how that's restored into all of these other platforms that we talk about. Hopefully that helps, Adam. Sam, anything to add on that, mate?
No, I think that's great explanation. I think the only other piece that I would add is obviously once you've restored it and it's sitting in its new home, just as we've just discussed, like it's still your responsibility to continue protecting that. So you can still use the same VBR to protect, let's just say you recovered it as an EC2 instance, and I'll do a demo of this in a bit. But you can use that same VBR instance to continue protecting it when it lands in its new destination. I think the other piece is kind of more on that whole cloud native containerized containerized talk track is like if you're running Kubernetes on premises or in the public cloud, we've obviously got Kasten as well that will help you protect that entire application that's been containerized, but you also have that same degree of portability across different infrastructures, right? We've got a massive ecosystem that Veeam Kasten supports. And if you want to move from one location to another, one distribution to another, also perform the transforms necessary, which Michael, I'm not sure if you've got anything else that you'd like to add there, but
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So maybe you've started your Kubernetes journey and you've started on-prem, you've done it the hard way, you've built it around either physical machines and your Kubernetes nodes become their physical servers in a rack or their virtual machines living on a hypervisor. Either way, you've started that way and then you've realized maybe like that's got us so far. We've dipped our toe in the water. We know that this works. This is the way we want to go. We've developed our software in this way, but now we feel like we need to go off to an EKS or a Red Hat OpenShift on Azure ARO or something another Kubernetes distribution, maybe a managed Kubernetes distribution that you don't have to worry about the control planes and the configuration of that. We have the ability from a Veeam Kasten for Kubernetes perspective to provide that same mobility story to be able to take a backup, send that into say S3, could be S3 compatible, could be Azure Blob as well. We don't need to get into the weeds on where we can send it, but then we can, as Sam mentioned, we can transform what that needs to look like in that destination Kubernetes cluster. So just because it came from maybe a vSphere Tanzu cluster or OpenShift on-prem or running, you name it, on-prem, we're able to restore that into an EKS or an AKS cluster, or even it could be that you started off in EKS and you want to go to Azure to AKS. That's fine as well. We can do that transformation. We're similar to that VBK format. It's not the VBK format, but it has that freedom of choice, that mobility story that we just touched on as well. Just to tie in both of those from a image-based backup point of view, we can restore that anywhere. We can do the same from a Kubernetes point of view.
Awesome. Thanks for that great question, Adam. So I think we've established, right, irrespective of how you're choosing to run applications today or in the future, it's your responsibility to protect that. Here's the shared responsibility model, just kind of showing that transition of, different services within the cloud. The content, the access policies, that still falls on you. Content is data. Data is your responsibility to protect. But not all data protection or resilience is created equal. Again, another fantastic stat from the most recent data protection trends report that shows like the top priority is data protection integrating with cybersecurity tools. We're talking about Kasten right now. Kasten integrates with a number of cybersecurity tools as well as cybersecurity services or technologies. So things like immutability on Azure Blob or Amazon S3, integration with SIM tools. So for example, the most recent release featured integration with Azure Sentinel. So the ability to, again, integrate with cybersecurity tools as backup or data protection becomes, let's just say, a fully fledged citizen of a cybersecurity ecosystem from that remediative perspective versus that like proactive prevention. We've kind of just spoken about the mobility piece. Look how many people are focusing on mobility. Anything in blue is around mobility, right? The ability to move from one cloud to another, the ability to do DR to a cloud host, the ability to move workloads from on-prem to the cloud, and then importantly, the ability to standardize protection of on-prem and cloud policies, right? We live in this hybrid multi-cloud world. Not all data protection is created equal. And what we typically see is a number of organizations using multiple different point products from multiple different vendors in order to achieve data protection for their different services. Again, this is where Veeam comes in, and we can help you standardize that protection under a common platform, whether it is a physical machine on-prem, whether it's virtualized like vSphere or Hyper-V, whether you're going the cloud-hosted route with VMs in the cloud, whether you're going platform as a service, whether you're fully decoupling and going containerized microservices. Veeam will help you protect that data and the entirety of that application, and more importantly, recover that entire application should you need it. And the other point is I want to highlight that native is needed. you could, in a lot of circumstances, take kind of like a vanilla backup agent and apply it to a physical machine, to a virtual machine, to a virtual machine in the cloud, but it's not going to give you the best degree of protection. All these different environments have differing data protection requirements, let's say, or best ways to protect it. And native is always the best. And I think a lot of organizations are realizing this, and that's kind of why they're choosing multiple different tools from multiple different vendors. Again, Veeam will come in and will natively protect everything, but consolidate it under a single platform. So you can achieve those low recovery point objectives and low recovery time objectives. You can have that operational efficiency, right? We've got a number of studies out there of folks that are consolidating their backup tools, standardizing on Veeam. In fact, we recently released a TEI study that highlights that. It's great from a cost control perspective as well. Like, do you really want to be going out and installing an agent on every single cloud VM that you have? Or do you want to be leveraging native integrations and so other integrations with other services like IAM and the security services that we mentioned? Native is ultimately the best way. So, what does it mean for a company to pursue data resilience, right? We're using this term resilience. We look at it across 5 core pillars, right? So the first is data backup, right? Backups are often the target of things like ransomware attacks. And it's, again, irrespective of where it resides, a backup is critical to ensuring the maximum uptime, the maximum resiliency. Then we talk about, recovery. Traditional recovery strategies leave businesses vulnerable, and 43% of data is unrecoverable post-attack. Again, Veeam is all about providing the most flexible recovery options and the fastest recovery options. In the cloud, we're documented to have 7 times faster recovery options. We've got granular recovery options. And then tying into that data freedom piece, the ability to not just send your backups to a different infrastructure, but actually restore to a different infrastructure. Again, whether that's on-prem to the cloud, from one cloud to another, from one Kubernetes distribution to another. We want to empower you with that freedom, not be prescriptive in our approach and tell you where you should host data, because that just causes lock-in and stops you from achieving your other goals. We just want to give you with the technology. We want to give you the technology to move your data as you see fit and continue to protect it everywhere. And then, of course, data security. We will need to make sure that our backups are as secure as possible, as clean as possible if we want a clean recovery. And that intelligence as well through monitoring, analytics, artificial intelligence, being able to do more with less, make better business decisions. Data is all at the hub of that. You've got production, fresh data in your backups, and Veeam can help. So, we've spoken a little bit about, our platform. Again, you guys probably know and love Veeam for, what you've traditionally used us for in our almost 20 years of existence, right? The virtual machines, the physical machines, your enterprise applications and unstructured data. But the platform extends way beyond that, right? All of these different cloud services. We've got containers as well. So this is a great slide to kind of give you an idea as to, the broad extent of our ecosystem at a high level. So again, you'll see AWS, Azure, Google there. Again, whether you're using IaaS, PaaS, they're different distributions of Kubernetes. We've got Kubernetes down in the bottom right. And there's a lot more coming in 2024, right? So we'll be adding additional services on-prem like MongoDB and Proxmox virtualization, as well as more cloud-hosted services like Entra ID, Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2. The extensive workload coverage continues. So again, irrespective of where you are on that spectrum, what your strategy is, where you are in your journey, you can have that data resilience, again, all from Veeam. So let's move into some demos. So the first one I wanted to show you is just, a traditional application on AWS. So over here, we've got our data center on the right. We've got VBR installed in our data center, and it's doing everything that you guys know and love us for. But it's also deployed and linked to a VBA or Veeam Backup for AWS appliance that allows us to, again, natively protect that application on AWS. So we've got our 3-tiered application running on 3 different EC2 instances, the attached block storage, and then our native snapshots. So that's the native approach. Again, snapshots are great to get us, those low RTOs and RPOs. but you can see that they're not independent of the storage and the instance that's powering that application. So if something were to go wrong, either within this production account or just within this application, stuff were to be deleted, let's say, we're not going to have anything to recover from. So we take an image-based backup and we store it in that in an S3 bucket. Great for data protection. We do it in a separate backup account with tight IAM privileges to ensure that people can't negotiate access easily to this backup account. It's great from a cost effectiveness standpoint. S3 storage is much, much cheaper than EBS volume, so we can meet retention requirements without blowing out our budget. And like Michael was talking about earlier, that backup is now in that VBK format in that S3 bucket. So if I want to restore this, let's say to Azure or to an on-premises virtual machine, I absolutely can do so. So let's take a look at what this looks like. Of course, with my crash, there she is. I'm going to log in. So make this full screen so you can see it. This is the Veeam backup for AWS web UI. This is launched directly within VBR, and I can see an overview of my entire environment. So over on the right-hand side, I can see that I've got 9 EC2 instances that that I have in my environment. Only one of them is protected. Same for my databases, only protecting 2 of 6. Now I've got gaps in my data protection strategy. Why is this data not protected? So I just want to show you just how easy it is to protect this stuff. Just because it's in the cloud, it doesn't mean that it's something crazy or new. It's very, very easy to do. So I'm going to go in and let's just edit this policy. So I'm going to go in, I'm just going to say test. And this is where I start to point at my sources. So what is the kind of stuff that I want to protect? I choose my IAM role, which is going to give me the permissions to perform those backups. Which regions is that data in? Right now, I'm just looking at US East North Virginia, but maybe I've got multiple regions within my organization that have data that I want to protect. We'll keep it as is for now. And then within that region or regions, what do I want to protect? And this is really interesting. Do I just want to protect all resources with this policy? Or do I want this policy to protect only specific resources within this? And I can do this based on instances or more interestingly, tags. So Adam, going back to your question, what I could do is I could have a policy that looks for, let's just call a tag that says recovered. And if I recover an application that was on-prem or a machine that was on-prem and push that into the cloud, I don't then have to go and manually start to protect this. This policy is going to scan for that tag, find it, and apply a policy to it and automatically start protecting it. But I'm only going to protect specific resources here. It's just one EC2 instance running Windows, and that's it. If there's any specific resources I want to exclude, I can absolutely do that. Start to look at the guest processing. So do we want to do application aware snapshots, right? So we use the SSM agent to ensure that application consistency. I've got the option to run additional scripts for Linux or Windows instances if I choose. And then my targets, right? So do I want to replicate snapshots across regions? I've got that turned on right now. I'm replicating those snapshots to US East. I've also got the ability to enable backups, right? So I mentioned before, we're taking the snapshot. Now what are we doing about an image-based backup? So I've got that turned on and it's being stored in this S3 bucket. I've also got archives as well turned on. So this is like S3 Glacier archive, deep archive storage. Again, fractions of a cent. So great for long-term retention where the likelihood of recovering is small, but I need to retain that data and not blow out my budgets. Next, I'll start to look at my schedule. So look at my daily snapshot schedule. Right now, I'm only taking one snapshot a day, but it's super easy to change this. I can go and say, hey, I want to take a snapshot, let's just say every single hour, or do I want to take multiple per hour? I want to do a replica once a day, and let's just say I'm going to do a backup every, 4 hours. You can see just how easy this is to do. How many snapshots do I want to keep? Replicas do I want to keep? How long do I want to keep backups for? And the same applies to my weeklies, my monthlies, and then I could also turn on annuals as well. Tags, pretty self-explanatory. Copy those tags from those source volumes onto the backup. Just some general settings. So if there's a failure, automatically try 3 times. I could enable notifications as well. So if there were a failure, I don't have to log in to see that. I can have that emailed to me. One of our customers' favorite features is around cost estimation, right? The cloud is not a charity. The cloud can be very expensive, and backup in the cloud can be very expensive. So before I even commit to implementing this policy, we're looking at those list prices as well as the data that's within that specific EC2 instance. And we're showing you it's costing you this much in snapshots, this much in replicas. Break it down to what your estimated monthly cost is. So you can avoid bill shock. And I know that it's only costing me $1.39 to protect this per month. And this is dynamic, right? So if I go in and actually truly, change some of this, I'm just going to do something random. Like, let's say I'm going to keep 100 snapshots and I'm going to keep backups for 365 days. I can apply that, and you can see up in the right, my cost has already tripled. Again, it's kind of broken down here so I can see what's actually gone up. And again, making sure I right size my protection. So that's just how easy it is. It gives you a little summary of the policy. You click finish, it saves that, and off it runs. For protected data, it's just as easy for databases, whether those are the 6 different flavors of RDS, DynamoDB, we've got Redshift, we've got our file systems as well. I have nothing here, and VPCs as well. So our VPC is our configuration of our private network within the cloud. I can protect that as well. And should there be any errors that bring my environment to a halt, I can restore that. I can do compares and contrasts of what's changed. But recovery is just as easy. I can click on this instance. I can perform a restore of the entire instance, a restore of the attached volume, or even granular file level recovery if it's just an individual file or folder. And my options are pretty extensive here. I can restore it in place of the existing instance. I can restore it as a new instance in the same account, a new account, the same region, a different region, or I could go back into VBR and perform that cross-platform restore, send it over to Azure, bring it back on premises, whatever it might be. So, our protection for those kind of cloud-based or cloud-enabled workloads is very extensive. But what I want to do now is turn you over to Michael to give you a demo of Kasten and how we protect those containerized applications. Michael, you still with us after that?
Yeah, still here. So yeah, before you hit play on that on the video, sorry, Sam.
Oh, very good, mate.
I wanted to set the scene here. So we're going into a Kubernetes cluster. It was actually a demo that I created for a session at Cloud Native Rejects, which is a KubeCon session earlier on in the year when we were in Paris. But I think it talks about end-to-end of deploying an application, potentially accepting that the default configuration of that application is okay because no different, and it's not my job. I've just deployed the application, when actually we should be mindful of that. It also talks about scanning that the deployment. We're using an open source tool called Trivy here that I'll touch on, but equally the importance of that data. So, and then I'm going to flip into, and I'll mention it when I do, is that what happens when bad things happen to that data, to that application, and equally what happens when they try to attack our backups as well. And this should resonate from a virtual machine backup, a cloud-based backup, but equally, obviously, the demo is around Kubernetes. But this could be used in any of those scenarios. So yeah, if we hit play now, Sam. So yeah, setting the scene, we have our cluster, we have our mission critical application here. You can see Pacman, everyone needs a Pacman application. And we're just going to log some mission critical data into our Mongo database backend. Just quickly add that in. So it was called KubeCon because we were there. So saving that, and this is being stored in a MongoDB backend database. Just to confirm what that looks like, I'm going to use a UI to connect into that. And the reason that I can connect into that is because that default configuration exposed the database externally, not just externally for me to access, actually externally to the internet, which is generally a bad idea. So you can see there we have our mission critical high scores in our database. Doesn't matter if you don't understand MongoDB, just know that that ties up with what you saw on the web front end. So with that, great stuff. we obviously have some data. That data is important to us. So I want to make sure that we're also, so here we go. We see that we're exposing that service out to the internet using a load balancer in AWS. First bad sign on that front. We also, though, we have a policy created that in Kasten for Kubernetes, which allows us to protect that. And you can see we're offloading that into our S3 location, into Amazon S3. So we have backups of that. We're also using the concept of a blueprint. Databases are constantly moving, data services are constantly moving, so we need to make sure that our application is consistent. We are using an open source tool called Canister, and we're orchestrating that with Kasten. Now, Canister is an open source project that we created. We donated to the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. It's now a sandbox project within the CNCF landscape. If you look at that kind of mess that they have there, and basically this allows us to dive into that MongoDB, but equally if it was MySQL, if it was Postgres, etc., it would allow it. We can write blueprints, custom blueprints for that. Our backup, I just sped through that. We have a backup, which is a snapshot, and then we have an export, which is what's landing in here in our S3 bucket. So you can see here that we have a bucket that has our K10 backups in there. And we're currently exporting out into that S3 bucket. Great stuff. This is admin hat on. You can see here now I want to test as that admin. I want to use that Trivy. It's going to look at misconfigurations in the deployment that we used. I used Terraform to deploy that Kubernetes cluster. So it's going to tell us, again, some of those defaults that we should be aware of and we should probably fix. But sometimes easy is the default. So what we're doing is I'm going to run that same scan against our Terraform code, and you can start to see, oh yeah, there's some critical things in here that we need to be aware of. One being, public cluster access. That seems like a bad idea from the off. What else do we have? Security group rule allows all egress to multiple public internet addresses. That doesn't seem great either. And bear in mind, these are the defaults. So you go into AWS, you create an EKS cluster, bad things are happening from the offset. Now, switching mode to, in fact, we will in a second. Let's just wait for this backup to complete, or the export out to S3 to complete. Should not be very much longer. And then I'm going to, you can't see me, but I'm going to flip my hoodie on. I think there's a little image that happens in the right-hand corner, and we're going to flip to the bad guy who now takes advantage of that exposed port, and we're going to cause some havoc in our application. Again, we see this every day in the news, topical conversations around malicious activity and hitting our mission critical application. Okay, so we're just finishing up that exporting the metadata to our S3 bucket. This is around that MongoDB, making sure that it's application consistent. Okay, all good. We have our mission critical data. And now we can flip to baddie mode, hacker mode. So first of all, I've gained access into the environment and I'm going to attack that open database. And with that, I've encrypted all of the data and I have added a new high score just so that everyone knows we have your data with a high score of 10,001. Then I've gained access into your S3 bucket because I'm now in your system. And you can see mission critical data has been compromised and encrypted. Use discount code rejects to pay the ransom. Not dissimilar to actual ransomware attacks. Now I'm going to use a bucket attack script. It's going to attack the backups because I found out where they are. And if we refresh that actually looks pretty believable that our backups are now gone. And if we go back, you not so has Sam been booted again? No, we're back. So I'm going to turn back into admin mode. Hoodie's off. I'm back into being a goodie. I have to go to my exported copy. I'm going to go out to S3 to get that restore point. and I'm going to just simply hit the alarm button, and I want to restore everything. Now, I could, in theory, use this restore point and restore that to a different cluster and get up and running somewhere else. But just for the sake of this demo and shortness of time, is that I want to let's just get that restore happening. So I've restored everything back into that namespace. So you can start to see we rip out everything that was there. So the bad compromised piece is gone. You can see that we go refresh, but we had versioning enabled. We had the object lock API also enabled. So actually that deletion may have looked menacing, but it actually wasn't. All our data was absolutely fine because we enabled the object lock API, the immutability from a location profile perspective. So we're running through that restore process. And what we're going to do is, because we need to make sure that that is in a consistent state, we're going to use this canister blueprint, which the best way to describe this is an orchestrated script of instructions. This is how we're going to bring it back. So we're watching that particular namespace where our application was running, and now we're initiated a restore process of that. So anytime now, we'll start to see that restore process start to kick in. Again, we're having to pull things down from S3 into our EKS cluster. So we'll have to bear with that. We're going to start unpacking that, uncompressing, all of that good stuff. You can start to see here that we have our MongoDB pod up and running, or container creating. And we have our Pacman, which is a Node.js front end that, again, is starting to run. So in theory, that MongoDB will be associated to a persistent volume claim, which is where our important data lives. All good, everything's up. You saw that it took 25 seconds, add another 10 seconds to the rest of that. Again, just check Kasten. Yeah, looks all good. 2 green ticks means that we've restored successfully. Let's head on back to our mission critical app, and we're back in action. But that's not where we should leave it, because guess what will happen if we leave the defaults like they were? So let's first of all, we can manually change that service. That MongoDB service shouldn't be exposed to the internet. So we can edit that like this. This is bad practice, but a very quick way of doing it. You would normally do this via code, and you'd update it the proper way. However, I'm in a rush and it's nearly the weekend, so I want to get out. So I've made that change. Now, if we do the same command, it's now no longer exposed to the internet, as you can see, which means we won't have that same mistake happen again. The bad person won't get in. And I think that's us back up and running and end of the video.
Hey, we're still tracking on time, Michael. We've got 6 minutes left to just get through a final few slides. Thanks for that great demo. I think, really, again, this is here just to show the breadth of Veeam and just how easy it is to protect these applications, no matter, how big and scary and new that they look. So just a couple slides to leave you with. The first one is just like the extensiveness of our coverage for, I guess, like non-containerized workloads on the public cloud. This one is actually missing one of our newest services, which is Redshift on AWS. So that's a data warehouse. So again, irrespective of how your organization is choosing to execute its cloud strategy, whether you're kind of, in that cloud-based or cloud-enabled setting, or whether you've gone full containerized, Veeam has got you covered. Look how extensive the number of applications, Kubernetes distributions, the different storage infrastructures and services that we integrate with. Veeam is here to have your back to ensure that you have that 100% watertight data resilience, whether you're choosing traditional on-prem to cloud native and everything in between. If you do want to get hands-on with, I guess, some of our newest products outside of Veeam Data Platform, you can get started with Veeam Kasten today. If you have anything either in dev or in prod that's containerized, you get up to 5 free nodes with Veeam Kasten, and it is fully featured. Got some great content out there as well. There's still that kind of myth out there that Kubernetes, especially stateless applications, do not need protection. There is going to be stateful data somewhere, whether it's inside or outside of the cluster, and it's going to be your responsibility to protect that. So fantastic asset here, which I'm sure we'll send you afterwards, but there's a QR code up in the top right. For if you want to go and read that, that's published by ESG. Another Veeam report, which is our 2024 ransomware trends report, is now live as well. So if you kind of want to see what the world of cybersecurity is looking like, absolutely go ahead and download that. QR code in the bottom left. And if you're not ready to, go out and deploy some software into your own environments, we've got some great, fantastic hands-on labs that you can play around with as well. So these are real-world environments that we put up for you for free to go in and play with the latest and greatest from Veeam, whether that's traditional Veeam backup and replication for on-prem, looking to play around with the cloud, as well as Kasten. So that gives us 3 minutes for any additional questions. Megan, I cannot see the screen, otherwise everything just goes funny for people and I'll probably get kicked off again. So if you wouldn't mind reading out some of the questions, Michael and I are here to help.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I can see them as well, Megan, but if you can probably see them quicker.
Sure, no worries. So just final reminder, everybody, if you have any last questions that you want Michael and Sam to address, there's a little comment box on your top right with a question button that you can go and submit your questions. So the first one is, do you think that public clouds are safer for Kubernetes than on-premise solutions?
I think it's ultimately a good question for Michael, not just specific to Kubernetes, but anything public cloud. I do think that there is that misperception out there that public cloud is less secure than on premises. Michael did show a good example of what some of those default settings were. I'd actually argue that it's easier to securely architect things in the cloud, just given the number of integrations and services out there available. It's just understanding how you do that, right? So we showed the importance of immutability in the demos. Absolutely possible to make your non-containerized backups immutable as well by putting them in an immutable bucket. But just understanding, like, air gapping. Air gapping is and has been critical for a long time, but an air gap was traditionally a tape piece of media that was ejected, and you have that air gap between something that's on the network and something that's no longer on the network. In the public cloud, how do we achieve that? It's around the notion of like logical air gapping. So looking at what are the security boundaries in the cloud. So in AWS, it's your accounts. In Azure, it's subscriptions. In Google Cloud, it's projects. This is why we advocate for having that dedicated account to house the backup solution as well as the backup data away from production. Things like RBAC and MFA are also critical. Things like encryption as well. So integrating with things like KMS services, key management services to encrypt data, right? If you don't encrypt your data, someone else is going to. But we're seeing, the age-old ransomware exfiltration attempts on the rise again as people really kind of like lock down and harden their repositories that are storing their backups. If that data is not encrypted and there's things like PII, PHI in there, they're just going to exfiltrate it, download it on a thumb drive, and they'll hold you ransom that way. So encryption, integration with different services there, all of it's achievable in the cloud. It's just knowing how to do it and making sure that you implement it. Michael, anything to add to that?
Yeah. So I think to your point, Sam, I think there's so many variants of Kubernetes distributions. You can roll your own on-prem in a virtualization world. At that point, like, how much control do you have? Do you own the data center? Are you using a shared co-location in the public cloud? Do you have education within the teams that are protecting that? Like, there's so many variants on what that is. So I don't think there is a less or more answer, because any of us can make Kubernetes really, really not secure. Any of us could make virtualization not secure, but then we can massively harden both of those environments as well. But we can only harden them if we're skilled and educated and understand what that is. And I think there's three different platforms that we've just mentioned, whether that is Kubernetes, whether that's virtualization, or whether that's cloud. And none of them are exclusive, because we can run Kubernetes in the cloud, we can run virtualization in the cloud. I think it's about having an understanding of how far you need to go, and having an understanding of, okay, we're accepting that we have to have some doors open so that our users, our customers can use our service. But we mitigate that risk by making sure that we have a copy of that data somewhere else, or have the ability to roll that or use that in a different cloud if need be. So it's about having that mitigation, having that resilience strategy to that. So I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. Oh, Kubernetes isn't secure because of XYZ, or virtualization. I think it really depends, which is a rubbish answer. But hopefully, some of the insight into what Sam said and what I've just said helps define what that looks like.
Any of those with more questions, I'm happy to stick around and answer. Megan, any more that's come through?
We do, yes. We have one from License Admin. What about an on-prem environment having the DR site on AWS? The on-prem is protected with Veeam VNR. In a disaster, we need to fail over to AWS. Is that possible to keep both of these environments protected at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to replicating on-premises workloads into AWS, it's typically a VMware cloud conversation for Veeam. But we did also mention earlier on, I wouldn't say that it's like a failover, but a recovery to the cloud also gives you that option. So you don't necessarily need to be having AWS as a hot site in order to, and paying for that just should the worst happen, although it's absolutely supported. You've got a number of options. If your budgets don't allow for that, you can, again, just be sending those backups to the cloud, or even keeping those backups on-prem and then just performing a restore to the cloud as an EC2 instance, or Azure VM, or a Compute Engine VM, should you need that. Michael, anything to add there?
Yeah, I was going to mention around the Veeam Universal Licensing. If you're protecting a virtual machine on-prem using VUL or Veeam Universal Licensing, then and you choose that you want to restore that, the restore is covered anyway. You can freely recover anything from Veeam anywhere. But if you want to continue that backing up in AWS after the fact, maybe the whole, let's say you have VMware on premises, and let's say it's your data center is now underwater, and you've decided that everything is being restored into AWS as EC2 instances for disaster recovery. That same license can follow that workload into AWS. So you can start protecting it in exactly the same fashion. Now, we don't necessarily have the automated or orchestrated response to be able to bring that back into that vSphere environment after the fact. We have that direct restore to VMware and instant recovery, and that license is flexible in that regard. So there's a lot to unpack in there. Again, it depends on what DR what does DR mean to you, but I'll know that the technology is there to lift and shift workloads from A to B, and the license can follow that, if that makes sense. We only license on the production protected instances.
Absolutely.
Hopefully that
All right.
covers it.
Well, we're 5 past, so I do want to say thank you for everyone for sticking around for these last 65 minutes. I hope you found this webinar informative. There's a ton of resources out there, some of which we shared with you, but personally, I learned by doing. Getting hands-on with the labs is always a fantastic option for me. Again, thank you, and we'll see you on a webinar soon.
Oh, thank you guys so much. What an interesting conversation. Really appreciate that, Sam and Michael, for a really wonderful presentation. The demo, love getting into the hands-on version. As you said, Sam, that's hands-on learning. That's where it's at. And, I think jumping in and getting to see a little bit of that in action was really helpful for all of us. Obviously, lots more to get into, lots more to explore. So I'm hoping that for most of you out there, you've already found that handouts tab. If you haven't already, go visit that right now. There's 2 really cool handouts I want to call out. One is it's kind of like an ebook. It's called 7 Steps to Avoid Kubernetes Ransomware Disasters. Really well laid out and just an interesting read. And what I like about this too is getting into these sort of action steps, taking it from conversation to something that you can actually implement. So that's a pretty great handout for you to take away. And then Veeam Kasten for Kubernetes V.0, Cyber Resilience and Enterprise Solutions. Easy to follow, absolutely packed with information. Please do go check that out. Again, this is this is a great dig into Kasten and what we were just kind of chatting about a little bit with Michael and Sam, and really taking that to something that's a little bit more shareable. A lot of times when you finish a webinar and you're going and you're telling all your friends and coworkers about it, and sometimes it's hard to remember all those key details. So this handout is a great sort of key highlights and headlines and things that you're going to want to bring back to your team after we wrap. So make sure you've got that one as well. I do want to say I do still see questions coming in from all of you, great questions coming in, and I want to let you know that I know that we're, as Sam has said, we're a little over time, so we're going to have to leave that there, but we are going to make sure that all the questions you asked get sent to the Veeam team, so you will get responses back from that collection of superheroes. You will hear from them, so please do get those questions coming in. I see the thank yous. Thanks, Ahmed. That's wonderful. Ahmed's thanking us for all the great information, and I appreciate that. I'm going to make sure that our speakers see that before they wrap up and head out. And again, as another thank you to all of you, I want to give you a $250 Amazon gift card to someone special, lucky, live and present here at the webinar. And that special lucky someone is Courtney Riley from Texas. Courtney Riley from Texas, congratulations. You have won a $250 Amazon gift card. We will follow up with you after we wrap, so stay tuned for that. I'll also point out, if you haven't already seen it, there's that poll up on the screen here. Again, this is a question, what else would you like to learn? A great way to make sure that you get the information that you're looking for. Obviously, go click on those handouts, keep those questions rolling in, but you can also just click the easy button. Just click right on that poll that you see up on the screen here and let Veeam know how they can follow up with you, what exactly you would like delivered into your inbox, and then that is exactly what you'll get. So click on that poll, get those questions in. That is your last assignment for the day. And while you're doing all of that, I am just going to wish you one last big thank you for joining us here. On behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I have to start by thanking Veeam for making this webinar possible, especially to Sam and Michael. Megan, thank you so much for joining us to get into some Q&A with the audience. You've all given us a lot to think about today, and that is a really wonderful way to spend an afternoon, which of course brings me around to all of you for taking time out of your days, for making space in a busy afternoon, morning, wherever you're joining us from, my afternoon. And I really want to thank you for spending it here with me. I absolutely had a wonderful time going through some of these more high-level approaches, but really narrowing down in on some of those action steps. We talked a little bit at the start about how complex resiliency can feel sometimes because it is so layered and there's so many elements to it. And I think today we got to narrow down on some of the really important action steps that we can be taking and how we can start to feel more of a sense of control in a world that can sometimes feel a little out of control. So I appreciate all of you taking the time to dig into that today, to explore. I'm going to wrap things up because I know we've gone a little bit late today and I want to get you on all about your days. But thank you so much for joining us. I hope that I get to see you all at a webinar again soon. And until then, I hope you have an absolutely beautiful end to your day. Thanks all.